All right, everybody, joining us now via Skype with highlights from the first ever virtual convention is Professor Jason Whitehead. He's a professor of political science and the director of the Legal Studies program at Cal State University Long Beach. Professor Whitehead, thank you for taking time to chat with us this morning.
Morning.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So right off the top here, how do you rate this week? First ever virtual convention. How did the Democrats do?
Well, you know, it's an unconventional convention, as they kept telling us over and over again. Political scientists have been saying for years that political conventions are really infomercials. They're infomercials primarily for party activists, but also to convince independents and moderates and others who may not be as familiar with the candidate, and to paint the candidate in the most positive light. In many ways, this was the triumph of the infomercial, right? I mean, it looked like a telethon, complete with the ticker tape down below to tell people how to text in to get more information on how to vote. So, you know, was that effective? Was that ineffective? I think it depends on the audience that you're trying to pitch your candidate for. And in this particularly contentious election year, it really became obvious over all 4 days that they're trying to pitch the character of this man more than the policies of the Democratic Party. And in contrast to Donald Trump, especially for those voters who may have voted for Trump last time, but maybe potentially swayable for this election.
Yeah, Professor, they seem to really hit hard on character, empathy, relationships with the common person. And they brought in under the tent not only former rivals, but Republicans. What's the impact of that?
Sure. This is something that's a key element of every political convention, but ordinarily you would have them coming up to the podium one by one, giving speeches, a little bit more of a stilted, moment where they cast their delegates to the nominee. In this case, I think you had a much more informal moment. This was an opportunity really to use the digital format to their advantage. And I think people are also familiar with this sort of Zoom meeting format now. And so it was an opportunity for people to be more personable about the way that Senator and Vice President Biden affected them on the campaign trail. And it was a way for them to implicitly contrast the character of their man, the character of Joe Biden, against the character of Donald Trump, who has a particularly fractious relationship with anyone that he's ever been in conflict with.
So, Professor, let's talk now about the speech last night. The whole week was leading up to this moment where Joe Biden accepted the nomination for President of the United States. You know, one of the major crux of his campaign is preserving the soul of this country. He was very accusatory of President Trump. How did he do? How do you rate the speech last night? Some pundits even said it lacked pageantry, but it was also like the most important speech of his career.
True, yeah. Of course, it was the most important speech of his career. And he came out of the gate, I would say, stumbling a little bit. Not stumbling in the overt sense, but not filling the moment with all of the presence that maybe it deserved at the very beginning of the speech. As the speech went on, I think those moments where he was most tender, where he's talking about his own loss, and he's talking about connecting with the loss of others, the story about his mom and his stutter, I think those personal touches, I think, are what the convention was all about. And the times in the speech when he connected with that and demonstrated that to the national audience, I think, were the strongest. But then at the end, I would say, especially his decision, the discussion of the decision to actually run for the presidency, and his passion that came out at the end to bring the country back together again and to use positive energy instead of the negative energy that people have become used to from the Trump administration. Those were the strongest elements of the speech. But given the format, he needed to mute a little bit, I think, so it met the moment.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting with these Zoom things, and you have to forgive so much of the lack of, polished production, and it somehow plays into the moment of being totally real. And because they concentrated so much on the stuttering of his youth, even if he wasn't, super on top of it in the beginning, you somehow forgave him as a result of that, and maybe that was intentional. All right, now, before we let you go, this next week is the Republican Party's moment and President Donald Trump's moment. You talked about it being a very contentious election. What are you expecting to hear?
Well, we've had some evidence recently, just in the last day or so, about what the Republicans intend to do. One thing is that they are focusing on patriotism. They're focusing on American history and the greatness of American history. And in my mind, and you can see this, I think, with some of Trump's tweets in response to the Democratic National Convention, I think they are going to focus a lot on the anti-American, what they're going to call the anti-American aspects of the American left right now, especially the aspects of the left that are engaged in protesting. They're going to show a lot of anti-police brutality and energy on the Democratic side, and they're going to ask, why didn't the Democrats respond to this? So they're going to try to paint the Democrats as dangerous left-wing anti-Americans, and by contrast, themselves as defenders of this great American tradition. I also think you're going to see, well, we know we're going to see the use of federal lands and federal property as backdrops for some of the speeches, especially Vice President Pence's, and certainly for the president's. And so that, is controversial legally, and we'll see whether it allows them, though, to have a kind of grandness of scale to take them sort of outside the digital format that the Democrats used and make them look more authentic, maybe more dynamic. That live element could actually play into their hand.
Shall
It's gonna be
see.
an interesting week ahead.
We shall
It
see. The
certainly
heat is on for
and
the
then
White
there's
House.
the debates, and then we're just 70-something days away.
Yeah.
It's so close.
Professor
Thank you
Whitehead,
so
thank
much,
you so much for being
Professor.
with us.
Yeah.
We'll be back, everybody.
We'll be back.
Stay right there.